How's it going? I did my second research paper on the Deepwater Horizon's oil spill back in 2010 and BP's involvement and impacts during the oil spill response. So, a little bit of background information on the Deepwater Horizon. The Deepwater Horizon was actually the name of the oil rig that ended up sinking to the bottom of the ocean in the Gulf of Mexico. It took over a period of 87 days to finally cap off the two leaks of the oil rig and contain the containment of the oil process actually took much longer. Uh, so the Deepwater Horizon was owned by a contracting company named Transocean, and Transocean was contracted out by British Petroleum to drill off of the coast of Louisiana there in the Gulf of Mexico to hopefully strike it rich. Uh, it was actually a pretty amazing feat. In September of 2009, she drilled the deepest oil well in history at a vertical depth of 35,000 feet. And to put that into perspective, Mount Everest, which is the tallest mountain in the world, is 29,000 feet above sea level. So 35,000 feet below sea level, pretty dang impressive. Uh, the incident happened on April 20th, 2010, uh, where the Deepwater Horizon crew of 126 individuals, um, a massive gas leak that had completely struck all the way up the riser, um, was not contained by the blowout preventer, which should have at least relieved some of the pressure coming all the way from the reservoir pocket of natural gas that they hit while drilling to prevent it from coming up all the way up to the rig. In fact, it didn't stop it. It continued to go all the way up the riser, all the way up to the rig, and found an ignition source at the top of the rig, which caused the catastrophic explosion of natural gas, killing 11 people and wounding a lot more. The total burn time, it took a little over 24 hours, 36 hours of continuous burning happened until the Deepwater Horizon finally sunk into the ocean. Um, the the day after the initial sink, British Petroleum re- deployed a remote control submarine to see how extensive the leak was. The leak was estimated approximately 5,000 barrels or 210,000 gallons of oil per day. So that was a lot. And remember, it took them 87 days to finally control the two leaks in the risers at the bottom of the ocean. Uh, Initially, BP immediately established an internal operations command center in Houston, Texas, where they made all of the big decisions there. And their initial response was a cleanup process that they set up trying to correct the disaster by using containment methods. Um, the cleanup process was entirely funded by BP, and the first portion of it was trying to contain the oil that was already had been dispersed. So they had used a resolution oil dispersant to try and contain most of the oil. This was a very, I don't want to say ineffective way to do it, but it was a very controversial way because the oil dispersant that they ended up using, which was actually okayed by the EPA and dispersed by the United States Coast Guard. Um, Later on, reports were put out that in fact it didn't help much and it actually made things worse. But it did end up helping somewhat, and things got a little bit better over time. Um, they used damming materials at first to try and block the two leaks at the bottom of the ocean in the risers, or in the riser, and that didn't work. They tried to use drilling mud, which is denser than oil, and that initially failed because the pressure was too great for the natural gas, and it just kept on popping off. So afterwards, the final resolution, they tried a couple different more techniques, but the final resolution was a device known as a capping stack. So they put this capping stack onto the two leaks in the risers and was able to alleviate the pressure slowly by having these valves that they were turning. and slowly over time, the valves, they began to turn back, turn back, turn back, and the pressure got less and less and less, and they were able to actually stop it from there. After the disaster was resolved, the U.S. Coast Guard developed an Incident-Specific Preparedness Review, or ISPR, to examine the event and the operational plan. And I went through it, and it had a lot of good evidence and information that BP had been a major factor in this and might not have been as effective as they could have been. BP should have had more infrastructures in place to mitigate and respond to this type of hazard. They didn't really, in fact. There could have been more done to prepare for this emergency because the magnitude of this response that it required, they weren't quite prepared for it. BP had little in place to respond to anything of this scale, like it's just stated. Knowing prior to the drilling operation, the incident, such as the blowout preventer, as I was talking earlier, it failed and should have been planned and accounted for to begin with, because the blowout preventer was something that should have prevented this incident from happening, and unfortunately, it did not. The inadequate contamination or containment and collection techniques also played a very vital role in the ineffective efforts of BP. Like I said, their containment methods weren't quite up to par, and afterwards people scrutinized over them very, very much. Actually, to this day, recovery efforts still continue. The oil was largely pushed north to the marshlands around the Gulf, and it hit Louisiana pretty hard. The total amount of oil released by the spill is actually estimated near 5 million barrels, or 210 million gallons of oil that were dispersed into the Gulf of Mexico. And this is labeled actually as one of the worst environmental disasters the U.S. has ever faced. So BP, I remember watching this over the news. While it was still going down, they did a pretty decent job over it, but the ISPR put together by the United States Coast Guard pointed out a lot of key factors that BP should have looked into in their continuity plan, and in fact did not have, and obviously should have, which would have made this disaster a lot more ready to respond to, and hopefully in the future a lot more preventable to happen to. So thanks for listening.